So today we're going to highlight 4 articles. One that has to do with giving people cash, didn't work out as well as we thought it would. 2 articles that deal with Social Security and some smart claiming strategies. And then 1 article that has to do with Gen Z and a certain segment of Gen Z that has discovered dividend investing and believes it's the 8th wonder of the world. And we're going to talk about why it's not all that it's cracked up to be. But I want to start here with this article that says, giving people money helped less than I thought it would. There have been several very high quality randomized control trials in the last few years studying the impacts of giving people a monthly stipend, a universal basic income type of deal. And what they do is, depending on the trial, everything from $333 a month, $500 a month, $1,000 a month. And the control group is the one that receives a very nominal amount, maybe $25, $50 a month. And what they do is they study the impacts and the outcomes of the group that received the higher payout to see what the benefit, what the impact of that was. What they found, to the surprise of many, is that really the only consistent positive income of these trials has been the recipients of the larger amount have worked a little bit less. But when it comes to things like mental health, life satisfaction, people seem to be at the same level that they were before. And in fact, things like physical health or employment or child development, even those things don't really seem to have been improved through this program, which is, depending on how you want to look at it, either highly upsetting or very predictable. And I think what it goes to show is that there is more to the problem of solving poverty and homelessness than just giving people money, which I think that's the mentality of a lot of people today, is the best way to get people out of poverty is simply to do a cash transfer, some type of universal basic income. Now, there have been other studies that have shown in times of emergency, when giving people money, that has actually been pretty effective because people intuitively understand, hey, if I've been displaced because of a natural disaster and I get money, I'm going to use that for shelter, for food, for transportation, for those immediate needs. But on an ongoing basis, simply giving people money does not equip them with the skills that you need for longevity in financial decisions. And that's delayed gratification, having a habitual savings, wise money management, organizing your budget. Those don't magically happen when you just give somebody $500 or $1,000 a month. And so certainly what it shows us is that there's a lot more work to be done if we really want to help lift people out of poverty, out of homelessness. If we want people to build stronger relationships with money, it can't be as simple as just giving them a few extra $100 each month. Let me move on now to our second article, changing pace a little bit. And this has to do with Social Security, a Social Security strategy that gives retirees more to spend. Here's a scenario that a lot of retirees find themselves in, especially these days, and that is Social Security. The full payout has now been bumped back to 67. So you have to wait until 67 until you get your full Social Security benefit. But many people are retiring before 67. And what do they do with Social Security? Now, you can take Social Security as early as 62, but it will be a reduced benefit. The earlier you take it, the less you will get. Certainly less than the full benefit. But on the flip side, if you delay past 67, you get an 8% increase in your benefit for each year that you delay, all the way up until 70. By 70, you have to take it at 70. That's the latest that you can wait. So here's a scenario that many retirees find themselves in. They retire at, say, age 65, and then they say, when is the best time to collect Social Security? Right now, immediately, take the lower benefit, but start getting income. Wait till 67, my full benefit, or wait as long as possible till 70 and get the maximum benefit. And so there's something called a bridge strategy that can really help retirees, not in every case, and this is certainly not recommended for every single person, but for many retirees, this can be an excellent strategy to put more money in your pocket long term and really reduce the risk of running out of money in retirement. And that is simply this. You wait until 70 to claim your Social Security, and in the meantime, you rely on other sources of income. So you have somebody maybe that they have a 401k, they have an IRA, they have a pension. And the strategy would be, don't claim Social Security now, let it continue to accumulate and build up to a higher amount, live off of your other income sources now, even if that means you have to be relying more heavily on them for a short window of time, so that when you turn 70, now you collect Social Security, that can replace most, if not all, of the income that you were bringing in from those other sources, now you've locked in a higher benefit for life, not only for yourself, but even for a spouse. Because remember, if your spouse has a lower Social Security benefit and you pass away, they are entitled to now step up to your higher benefit amount. And what we know is that the evidence has shown us, the studies have shown us that around age 80 to 81 is usually the tipping point by which, if you reach age 80 or 81 and you waited to collect Social Security until later, you'll end up with more money. And especially these days when people that have good health and longevity, many people are living till 85, 90, well into their 90s. And so with this strategy, not only does this allow you to get more from Social Security over your lifetime, it also really reduces the risk that you would run out of that money, because even though you're relying on it more heavily, like from your 401k or IRA in the early days, once you start taking Social Security, now you can really reduce the amount that you have to take out of that and even allow some of that money to grow over the long term potentially. So the bridge strategy, a great way to look at maybe getting more out of Social Security over the long term. Again, many factors as a financial planner. What I'm looking at is things like cash reserves for people, other income sources, their health, whether or not they're receiving an inheritance. All of these factor into whether the bridge strategy makes sense, but for a lot of retirees, this can be very, very helpful. Now, piggybacking off of this Social Security idea, let's move to our next article. This comes from an interview with Suze Orman. I'm sure many of you have heard the name Suze Orman. She is one of the most well-known financial influencers, financial gurus in America, radio show, TV show, many, many books. She has a lot of great resources out there. She was asked, what do you believe is the biggest retirement mistake that people make? And her answer was taking Social Security too early, which I thought was an interesting answer and probably the correct answer. I mean, I suppose there's many valid answers that you could put in there, but in her opinion, after spending a lot of time on this subject and talking to a lot of people, she believes that that's the biggest mistake that people make, is taking Social Security too early for a lot of reasons. Number one, I think a lot of people, it's a little bit of a panic response because they get misinformed about the nature of Social Security. They feel like, man, I don't know if Social Security is going to be there for me anymore. I might as well take it now because who knows, it might just go away in the future. I've talked about this several times on the podcast. It's a misunderstanding of how Social Security works, but also just sort of the human tendency to say, hey, I'll just go ahead and take it now instead of later. Again, is taking Social Security early always a bad decision? No, I wouldn't say always, but is it usually a bad decision? Yes, usually it's a bad decision. And so you want to be very careful about when you take Social Security, looking into things like a bridge strategy, making sure you're coordinating your Social Security decision with a spouse if you're married, and also looking at how this impacts the other areas of your finances. Like I said, how much you have saved, how much you have in cash, whether or not you're going to receive an inheritance, your health, your family longevity. All of these things should factor into these decisions, but I feel like for many people, they're just sort of making a little bit more of a gut decision, or even worse, making a decision based off of bad information. So be very careful about that. And then lastly, let's go ahead and wrap up with an article from Bloomberg on Gen Z and dividend investing. Very interesting to me. So there's this new segment of Gen Z investors, and like a lot of things these days, it's kind of finding its seedbed in social media, which is why you got to be so careful about where you get financial information from these accounts on social media that have no regulation, no certification, no licensing whatsoever. It's just people spouting off about their ideas and what they have in their Robinhood account. They've discovered dividend investing, which of course is a very interesting segment of investing, but the way that they're going about it, I think, is very, very detrimental. So really the idea of a dividend is there are many stocks that will pay out to their shareholders a certain amount on a quarterly basis. And it is subject to change, so it's not set in stone, but there are several companies that might pay, like, let's say, a 4% dividend yield. So if a share right now is $100, that means they're paying out $4 per share to shareholders. So if you own the share every quarter, you're getting $4 for the year. And so the idea is, if you have a large enough portfolio and you're invested in lots of stocks that have high dividends, maybe you're in the 5, 6, 7, 8% range of, hey, I get 5, 6, 7, 8% of my portfolio's value paid to me in a dividend isn't this great? This is like an infinite money glitch where just by being a stockholder, I'm getting income on a regular basis. And so the idea for a lot of these Gen Z investors is put some money in these dividend ETFs, these funds that invest in dividend stocks. You get your dividend payout on a regular basis, and then you can use that to supplement your income. There was one guy in the article that used it to put a $40,000 down payment on his house. He says, isn't this great? Why wait and save up this huge amount of money for retirement? I need money now. I put it in this dividend ETF and I get this extra income. And this helps me to escape my 9 to 5. And eventually, if I put enough money away in these dividend funds, that will replace my income, and then I will be able to retire early and be financially independent. A few problems with this. First of all, this massively impacts your long-term growth, because if the stocks, if the investments that you're holding are paying out most of their growth to you now, that means they're not going to compound like they would if you put money in a 401k or Roth IRA and just let that go and didn't take money out of it. Understand that a dividend is a forced sale as well. So in other words, you have a stock that's worth $100. It's paying out $1 dividend next week. What's going to happen after it pays out its dollar dividend? It's going to drop to $99. It doesn't stay at $100 because it has taken part of its value as a company and given it away. It's become less valuable when it sends out cash out of its company. So it's going to drop by the dividend amount. People don't realize this many times. And also, the reason that a lot of companies pay a dividend is because they are not super growth oriented. You look at the stocks that pay dividends, they tend to be in more defensive industries like utilities, industries where they're kind of hemmed in as far as their growth potential. And so the way to attract investors is usually rather by paying out a dividend, which also can mean companies that have a higher dividend payout have worse long-term growth outlooks. So you might be investing in companies that have a lower growth outlook or who are distressed, because think about it this way. A company that was paying out a $4 dividend on a $100 stock, that's a 4% payout yield. But if that stock drops to $80, okay, well, now the dividend yield is going to go higher and it's going to look like a better deal, but it's not a better deal. The company's actually gone down in value, but proportionally the dividend looks more enticing. So you see what I'm saying? You have to be very careful about chasing dividends. And most importantly, the best way to build your money over time is not to take the dividends now, especially if you don't need it when you're 25 or 30 years old. It's to reinvest them. Buy more shares and let that money compound over time. So be very careful. There's a lot of accounts out there, a lot of social media videos about dividends and how they're great. They're the eighth wonder of the world and everybody should do them. They're not as great as they're made out to be, and you have to be very careful, especially early on in life, not to invest in something for really what you don't need it for. And that is, if you're going to invest money, invest for the long term instead of trying to get everything now, because it's going to be one or the other. You're not going to be able to get a lot of income now and build up a ton of money for later. It's going to be one or the other, and I think it's better to build up a lot of money for later on. So in our Money Minute email that's going out today, there'll be some other popular posts, and then a group interview that I did with Brian Sams, Mike Lester, and Luke Clayton on discipleship. So I hope you'll check out that episode and that video if you haven't seen it already. Thanks. Have a great day. I'll see you on our next episode.